All right. Tonight I'm really excited to welcome Ryan Cummins. Ryan is the co-founder and vice chairman of Omaze, an online fundraising platform that makes giving fun and easy by offering once-in-a-lifetime experiences and dream rewards in support of critical causes. Over the past few years, Omaze has disrupted traditional models of fundraising and raised over $125 million for 300 charities through campaigns with influencers ranging from Jennifer Lawrence to Robert Downey Jr., Post Malone, Will Smith, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and my personal favorite, John Legend. Prior to launching Omaze, Ryan was the executive producer of content for Decade of Difference, the Clinton Foundation globally televised concert featuring influencers from film, music, politics, and sports. Before that, he did something really unique and special that we're going to dive into. He created a series called Untitled Thinkers, which were filmed conversations with 120 outliers and thought leaders that included Nobel Peace Prize winners, Fields Medal winners, and Pulitzer winners. Ryan started his career in cause content as the first director on Live Earth, the largest concert ever thrown, featuring 150 artists in 7 major cities, all in the same day. He holds a BA in economics from Stanford and an MBA from UCLA Anderson. Let's take a quick look at Omaze. Please welcome the co-founder of Omaze, Ryan Cummins. So good, thanks. Have a seat. Oh, man. So I want to talk about Omaze sort of centrally, but before we dive in, can you sort of give us an overview of where Omaze stands today in terms of people, reach, campaigns? We talked about the amount of money you've raised.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's obviously, you've seen it's gone up since there, and we're approaching about 150 million at this point in time for about over 400 charities. So I guess where Omaze is today, we started off with this higher purpose, which is to serve world changers, and the mission has always been to leverage the power of storytelling and technology to transform lives, and we've really stuck to that higher purpose and into that mission. When we first started, my co-founder Matt and I, I'm jumping right into the Omaze story. Is that all right?
We're going to go backwards to childhood a little bit.
Okay, so where Omaze is today, I'll stick to script. So we are in 2017, we did about 100 experiences. In 2018, we did well over 200. We're on pace to do well over 400 this year. We've also now added additional prizes as opposed to just the experiences with celebrities. So now we're offering the chance to win a car.
What kind of car?
So we've done a handful of cars. We started with a Tesla. We recently, Post Malone gave the chance you could go riding in a Bentley with Post Malone around LA and then take home the Bentley. A 17-year-old won that. So there's a 17-year-old in the Midwest right now that's cruising in a Bentley. We've got one where the Pope blessed a Lamborghini. That's a true story because it was a Lamborghini that was gifted to the Vatican, and they said, all right, you can actually put this out into the world to benefit some great cause. So we're doing those. We're also doing vacation packages, and then we've got a couple really exciting things that we're going to be launching for the very first time in about a month.
And how many people work at Omaze now?
Just over 100.
So growing, but not huge for the impact that you're making in terms of the number of campaigns and the reach. 100's a good size.
Yeah. 100 is a lot of people. Once you get up to 100 people, the dynamics change. It feels radically different than when it was just Matt and I sitting in an office with no windows. But yeah, we're really happy about the impact we're creating.
And just the business model, to the extent you can share it, how does Omaze sort of make money out of these causes?
Sure.
By supporting these causes?
So there's no charge to the charity. So we partner with charities. These are all vetted organizations. The celebrities give their time, and then we take a percentage of that. So right now we just changed our model so that we could actually raise more money across all of the campaigns. So of the gross donations that are raised, 60% of that gross goes on to the charity. And that's not Omaze taking 40%. What Omaze is then doing is putting that 40% towards all the costs of running the entire campaign, which involves the video content production. Storytelling is key to getting the message out, and so we've really built our brand up on that storytelling. It involves all of the travel and expenses for the winner and the guest. It involves the donor awards, so when you donate at different levels, you can get physical goods. And then the really largest expenditure is performance marketing. So as you guys probably well know at this point in time, to get your message out, it's not just going to social, but it's knowing how to actually target and hit the right demographics of people that are really interested in the experiences.
Excellent. All right, we'll dive into the business a little bit, but before that, so 3 things I sort of want to cover.
Yeah.
Life before Omaze,
Okay.
Omaze, mindset after and around Omaze, sort of what's next. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll start out just to give people context. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Brothers and sisters?
Yeah. How many people here from Michigan? All right. Whereabouts? St. Oh yeah, even smaller rural town, Grand Rapids. So I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Went out to Stanford for undergrad. So when I sort of describe my past, growing up in the Midwest was like, I ultimately had a non-nuclear family, but it felt like just family values and like sort of traditional Midwest upbringing. Everybody, even though we were a million-plus person city, felt like everybody knew somebody. You really couldn't get in too much trouble there because ultimately someone's friend or cousin knew your dad indirectly. Went out to Stanford, as I'm sure you guys have experienced when you've come here to USC. It was the first time that I was exposed to so many different perspectives from different people all around the world. And that was such a big growth opportunity for me to and this is something I'd recommend to anybody. I probably didn't do as much as I should. I did it later on in life, but when in undergrad, just talk to everybody. Like, talk to everybody in your dorm, talk to everybody in the cafeteria, meet as many people as you can, and really try and get to understand the perspectives, because that's really, the classes will teach you a lot, but that's not really where the learning takes place. This class, a lot of the learning takes place there. But for me, the real learning in undergrad took place in the conversations that you have and the opportunity to really start understanding how other people think and then form how you think as a result of that. So that was a lot that I learned there. The other thing I learned, as I'm sure a lot of you guys here at USC have learned, is like all my old bag of tricks from high school didn't work at Stanford. Like, there are a lot of kids that came in and like had done the entire curriculum in high school prior to arriving, and so I had to really sort of adapt and learn, what was I good at, what was I not good at, and try and play to my strengths while buffering up the weaknesses. From there, every summer when I was 18, 19, 20, right after my freshman year, I didn't want to go back to the Midwest. I was very passionate about storytelling, so I'd come down here to LA and started interning when I was 18. My first summer for a guy named Sid Gannis, who was at the time, the head of the Academy Awards and a producer. He'd produced a handful of Adam Sandler movies back in the day, and then many beyond that. And then for the next couple summers, I interned for a woman named Amy Pascal, who was the head of Columbia Pictures, and really gave me like an opportunity to see how studios run, to see how they select talent, how they select films, how they package the whole thing together. It was really another schooling for me. And then I did a summer with a guy named Spike Jones, who's a great music video commercial director and then a fantastic film director as well. And just studied his entire catalog. Like, every night I would steal another video from his library and take it home, and got to see all the videos that made it out into the public, but then a treasure trove of these videos that didn't, and like the rough cuts, and really understand like how he approached storytelling. And so that taught me a lot about storytelling. Mind you, while I was doing that, I was also working nights, first as the head of housekeeping and fitness at La Hermitage, which is this hotel on Burton Way. And then here's like, I've never really shared this story publicly, but in Michigan, when you want a job in the summertime, what you do in Michigan, or at least back in my day, now you do it in entirely different ways through social media, networking, and LinkedIn. Back in the day, before all of those things, you would literally write up like essentially your resume on a piece of paper and photocopy that a couple thousand times, and then just go flyer houses. And I didn't know that people didn't do that out here in LA. So one night at Sony, I made up these like quarter sheets of my name, and I'll teach your kids Spanish or paint your house or whatever you need. And I literally flyered Beverly Hills with like hire me things. And I can't believe I wasn't arrested. But a couple people called me and they were like, "Are you from the Midwest?" And I got jobs. So that summer I was a manny for these two little boys, 2 and 4. And did a lot. So did whatever I needed to do to make money so that I could support interning while I was at Stanford.
Any early entrepreneurial experience? Or were you a hustler as a kid? What were your interests as a kid before you went off to
Sure.
school?
So first job was a paper route. I did that when I was 12, and I was totally a hustler on that one because I got as large a paper route as I could because you make money based off the number of houses. And then the goal is, how fast can you get done with delivering papers on the day? And this will show you how cool I was in middle school. I set up this system where I could just basically rollerblade the entire route and would have like 4 bags and just be loaded with papers so that if I leaned a little bit too much one way or the other, I'd literally tip over, but would just rollerblade throwing newspapers from behind my head. And that was my first job. And then in high school, I played rugby in high school, and then I played for this men's league. And I met a guy in the men's league who had he sealed driveways. So he had like his sort of mom and pop's driveway sealing company, which he sold to me my summer before I went off to college. And so I spent the summer hiring my friends, and we must have sealed, almost 1,000 driveways that summer. And that sort of gave me all the money I needed for the first couple of years of college. So that was my first entrepreneurial stuff.
So you hustled as a kid.
Yeah.
That's a good indication. So what did you study at Stanford?
Economics.
Okay.
I was terrible at it.
But had a good experience. And then tell us about sort of, some of the students here are graduating this year and thinking about what's next. Did you know what you wanted to do? Did you have a clear picture that you wanted to get into the arts, entertainment, storytelling? How specific did you know what you wanted to do after school?
So I knew I wanted to be a director. And so I, at Stanford, studied economics because it was essentially the closest thing to business, and at that time when I was still 18, 19, 20, like a little bit of a deal with my dad to do something business-like while I was still coming down here to LA to study storytelling, but I wanted to get down here as fast as I possibly could. Now the one thing I'd say is that people would say this to me all the time, or my dad was really big on this, but I didn't totally take it in, but your 20s are just a time for like learning. Like just fill your head with as much information as you possibly can, but like do something. And that was like a great lesson for me ultimately to learn, and it comes into the interview series I did later on. But that lesson was like it's okay to be selfish throughout your 20s. The bigger lesson I was told is it's okay to be selfish throughout your 20s, like so long as you're out there and you're putting yourself, in the middle of the current and learning as much as you possibly can. Fill your head. Your 30s then become a time where, with luck and if you're interested in it, you find a partner and you settle down and start having some kids. And then in your 40s, you really focus on building community. And then I think maybe you have a midlife crisis and the whole process starts over again. I'm not sure. But I was just dead set on coming down to Hollywood and being the director and trying to get my mind filled with as much as I could from the entertainment space. And
so what were your first, your meaningful stop on that path?
Meaningful may be a stretch, but my first stop was I was the PA on, how many people have heard of the movie SWAT? Wow, more than I thought. Yeah, so I was a PA on SWAT. And Colin Farrell's body double for scenes that you didn't have to see his face. So that might be my my claim to fame. And then I was offered a studio job for Amy. She'd offered me a job, but I was so dead set on being a director that right after that PA gig, I wanted to just start doing all my own stuff. So then I spent a couple years really hustling as much as I could while directing as many commercials, music videos, or spec stuff, and then got repped by Anonymous Content, which is a big management firm here in LA, on this project. So this is back when superhero movies were not big yet, and so that hadn't become like Blade had come out and Spider-Man had come out, but not the entire Marvel catalog. And so my co-founder and I had found these 2 guys who lived out in Bakersfield, California. Cran Lefferts and Weldon Presley were their names. And they were really upset at Sony for ruining Spider-Man. Like they were massive Spider-Man fans and really upset at Sony for totally ruining the movie. And so they had set out to shoot Spider-Man before Sony came out with Spider-Man 2. But they wanted to stay like completely true to the original script. And these guys lived in their parents' garage and worked at a video rental store. And so they had like no credentials to do this. And they put together this video and put it online. And overnight they had 40,000 people supporting them and offering to do sound and stunts and costume and everything. And we wanted to shoot a documentary around these guys, and so we got repped by Ari Emanuel at WME, and then he sat us down in the room with a guy at the time named Avi Arad, who was the then head of Marvel, and we were showing him these two guys and this documentary about them, but what he found out in the room was we had actually created those two guys. They didn't really exist, and this was pre-Borat and before a lot of those pranks had come out, and so he got really upset and stood up and he stormed out of the room, and Ari and his right hand, a guy named Modi, said like that was the best thing that could have happened. Like wait 2 hours, he's gonna call back and he's gonna offer something else. And like to the clock, he called back and he offered a lesser character, and then the whole project got stuck in sort of D-hell. But that was our entree to really getting a project to have some traction. And then right on the heels of that, I got hired as the first director on Live Earth, which was that largest concert ever thrown.
Incredible. I mean, so it's interesting to see sort of how things line up. You're still a young guy, how things line up in the relatively short career you've had, that things all make sense for Omaze later. Mm-hmm. Tell us about, because we don't have time to sort of do everything, the lessons, and let's talk about Untitled Thinkers. How old are you? First of all, the fact that you get out of school, you turn down a job that most people would love to have and say, I want to be a director right away. That's It's pretty bold. So you're 24 years old and you're starting to direct things. How long until Untitled Thinkers comes along?
So I started Untitled Thinkers when I was 26, going on 27. Okay. And so what that was when I was 20, about 21, and just getting down to LA the summer before I graduated, I took out a legal pad and I just wrote this list of all the things that I wanted to accomplish in my 20s, sort of like a personal bucket list. And at the bottom of that list was try and sit down and interview as many of the world's brightest thinkers as you can. And so right after Live Earth, that was the first project that I saw really sort of have significant impact on a global scale. And I saw that as a great opportunity to go pursue this passion project. And so I went out and wrote a list of Nobel Prize winners and MacArthur Genius Grant recipients and Pulitzers and Fields Medal winners and just really interesting thinkers. And I started just cold calling them. And then when I got to a couple of them, I cut a deal with them that I went out with these 6 questions that I had, these just sort of big 6 philosophical questions that I was struggling with myself. And I went out to them and I would give them, the first 3, I'd give them sort of 30 minutes to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about, and they'd give a little bit of their stump speech and their eyes would glaze over, and then I'd ask them these 6 questions and sort of a spark would hit and they'd come to life and share their story. And then at the end of that interview, I'd say, hey, if you liked me and you liked this interview, I'd like you to introduce me to the next 3 people. And so what I discovered in that process was that people, 1, they liked the interview and they liked the questions, but 2, everybody wants to be on a list with names that are bigger than their own. So they started recommending like much more illustrious people, and 3 went to 9, went to 27, and a year later I'd ended up doing almost 200 interviews. And it was the most humbling experience of my entire life, because I started that year, I wasn't like obnoxious or cocky, at least I think I wasn't, but I definitely sort of had my opinions about the world and how the world worked with very little experience to back them up. And then I started meeting all of these people who'd gone incredibly deep in every single one of these different verticals, and I realized what it actually took to win a Nobel Prize, and how much they knew about the world and how little I actually knew about the world. And so it was the most humbling experience of my entire life and was incredibly transformative in a number of ways. But I came out of that as a completely changed person.
And here's some of the people that you interviewed. You aren't asking.
You found this, wow.
Yeah. You aren't asking small questions.
Yeah.
So what was the inspiration for it? In addition to being your bucket list, I mean, this is not an insubstantial project.
Sure.
What was the inspiration for it, and what did you learn? What were some of the more profound lessons that you took from this?
Sure. It's a good question. So I think the inspiration for it was this. When I was working in Hollywood, how many people here want to go into entertainment? Cool, fair number of hands. So when I was working in entertainment, I started to observe this cycle, which was that no one ever quite knows what idea is going to work and what idea is not going to work, but there's a very long pitching process and so many different entities involved, and it's a slog. It's a real slog. And I felt like I was sort of trying to craft ideas as opposed to being inspired by something. I was trying to put together what's the next most creative idea that's going to sound attractive to someone else so that you can pitch it and they get excited about it and it gets some heat and it gets some momentum and then they get some other people excited, and if you're really lucky, 100 meetings later you actually have something out in the world. And that was starting to not feel so authentic for me. And at the same time I had some things that I think I was sort of struggling with internally, and I didn't realize it. I wasn't able to articulate it this much, but those things ended up being those 6 questions. So the 6 things I asked all these folks were, what do you think is the function of a human? What do you think is the function of civilization? How would you define the concept of money? How would you describe the optimal interaction between self-interest and mutual interest? What patterns have you noticed over the course of your career across every discipline you've been involved in, and what do you hope for? And I didn't realize it, but I was basically sort of soliciting a body of information from all these different people that ultimately from that I could pull different ideas and form my own worldview. And so I started on this process, and I was going with a lot of scientists to begin with, or psychologists, because I have a natural interest in that. Like Brene Brown's fantastic. To the folks who shared her. She's got some really great stuff, and if you want like a little intro to her, even before the TED Talk, she does 2 little animated videos. One of them's on vulnerability, and just search Brene Brown vulnerability. It's a great video. But there were folks like her out there that I was really interested in, and then as I got deeper and deeper into these lessons, I realized the mind and mindset and understanding how we as human beings develop sort of our cognition and our metacognition became really interesting to me. And so I spent the last 25 interviews doing all neuroscientists, working on different topics and just trying to get to the root of what are memories and how do we develop our mindsets and what's a growth mindset. And so some of the lessons, here's the single biggest lesson that came out of it was a guy named Dr. Eric Kandel. Just an incredible human. Can I share a short story about Eric? Yeah, so Dr. Kandel, here's a guy who, when he's 8, 9, is growing up in Vienna, Austria, and Hitler invades during the Nazi invasion. So essentially, over the next couple of years, his family loses everything. They spare his father's life because his father had previously been in the army, and so they got lucky in that sense. But they lose everything. He and his brother, at 11 and 13, get put on a freighter and shipped by themselves. So at 11 and 13, get put on a ship and sent across the Atlantic to Manhattan. And then eventually his parents came over and met up with them, and they had to form their entirely new life. But he was really, as a result of that, his entire life was rocked. And so he was really interested in the roots of morality and what would enable people to, one day be listening to Haydn or Mozart or Beethoven, and then the next day, brutalizing another race of people. And so he got very, very interested in studying the roots of morality, and that ultimately led him to study Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis. And he was doing a lot of that at Harvard for undergrad, and then finally someone came up to him and they said, look, if you really want to understand the brain, you have to do it one cell at a time. And that's when he got into medicine. And so he went to med school, started studying the brain one cell at a time, and ultimately his work ended up pioneering the field of memory, and he won the Nobel Prize for pioneering the field of memory. But the lesson that he shared was this. So we as human beings have a spectrum on which our experiences take place. So bear with me for 1 second. It's a little sciencey, but we'll get through it. So we've already lost a couple people. So all right, there's a spectrum of experiences that we have. On one end of that spectrum is habituated experiences. On the other end of that spectrum are sensitized experiences. So while we've been sitting here, when you're sitting there having a meal and someone's phone's going off or other people are talking, that's a habituated experience. And those experiences ultimately sort of fade. Sensitized experiences are, if I asked everybody in here, where were you on 9/11? Show of hands, how many people can remember where they were on 9/11? It's like almost everybody, nearly everybody here. Like, where were you the first time?
They were also very young.
You're also very young, but where were you the first time you got kissed? Like, most people can remember. You don't have to raise your hand, but most people will remember. It's a very sensitized event. So the difference between those are habituated memories. Basically, we know as human beings, without thinking about it, that they're neither helping us, they're not rewarding us, nor do they have a punitive effect on our being. And so we habituate to them, and we ignore them, and they exist as that. With sensitized memories, and those form our short-term memories. So habituated memories form our short-term memories, and those fade away. With sensitized experiences, those experiences that do have a very rewarding effect on you or a very negative effect on you, what happens is in the nucleus of the brain cell, that your brain cell releases more protein, which strengthens the synaptic connections, the gray matter that's used to actually recall those memories. Those form your long-term memories. So essentially, at the end of the day, when you're sitting there having a conversation with yourself, you're having a conversation with the culmination of all your memories. And the way I look at that is it's the culmination of your most sensitized experiences. And so why that ended up being the most important lesson from all of those was it really speaks to the power of how intentional we as human beings are about the experiences we choose to engage in throughout the course of our life. Do you do things on a daily basis that are the same thing that you habituate to, that aren't really challenging you to learn new things, to go to new places, to meet new people, to experience new things? Or do you design your life around really exciting experiences that are constantly going to sensitize you so that you create stronger memories? And as a result, I've really taken to this approach of storytelling melded with experience design. How do we design the most exciting experiences possible to live the richest, most fulfilling life possible?
It's interesting from a psychological perspective whether high stimulation experiences denote a certain personality or denote things in your life. So we all, a lot of people like to seek travel. They like to seek adventure, concerts, experiences that where can you believe we were there? And those things, they can't be maintained, consistently, or else your life would just be like one, amphetamine trip,
Right.
Those are the highest of highs. But
sounds like a Neil's life. Bottle service.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's a good pull right there. That's a good pull right there. You can tell he's done it before.
Side note: on the way over here, I was on the phone with the founder of One Oak. So if you email Lauren, I'll connect you two.
Isn't that why you speak up? It's why you tell people what you're doing, what you're interested in, because there are so many people waiting to help. Did you want to talk about what you learned about listening and what you learned about the value of questions quickly before we sort of shift?
Sure. So those are two other really critical lessons for me. On listening, thank God I ended up listening to the first 10 interviews before I kept interviewing other people. And I was just completely ruining those interviews, just absolutely destroying them. And the reason I was destroying them is, right as Noam Chomsky was about to give this nugget of wisdom on power systems, or John Hennessy, the then president of Stanford, who became the chairman of Alphabet, was about to talk about the future of education. Right as they were about to give this nugget of wisdom, I would interrupt them with what I thought they were trying to say. And when you're listening to an interview, the last thing you want to hear is the non-expert finishing the expert sentence. And I listened to those interviews and was almost pulling my hair out because I realized how much I was destroying this entire process. And that taught me in that moment the value of really getting comfortable sitting in discomfort. And that discomfort is the silence after you ask someone a question. And we as human beings, I think oftentimes, most of us try and fill that space to make things more comfortable and to make them easier. And what I realize is that there's so much more value to be mined by getting comfortable not filling that space and allowing the person that you're talking to fill that space. And then there's a guy named Studs Terkel who's passed now, but he's one of the best interviewers, sort of known as one of the best interviewers of all time. And his big thing is then the single best follow-on question is and then what happened? Or why did you think that? And what would happen is as a result of sort of shifting from having my idea of what people were trying to say and filling the space and running these interviews, I really started growing this muscle of sitting with discomfort and allowing people to say things and then asking them follow-up questions. And what you learn in that process is that you really then begin mining gold, and people start sharing not just one, but many, many nuggets of wisdom. But then the additional benefit once you start getting that wisdom is then now I know, what Professor Belasco values and how he thinks about the world. And if I interview Lauren, now I know what she values and what she thinks about the world, and now I can connect them. And I can connect them not based off something that I'm trying to improve for myself, but something I know he values and something I know she values and something that I know is going to be an additional value that gets created by them being connected with each other. And it really becomes this shift of recognizing that you can become a person that's not just putting yourself in the spotlight for me, but putting yourself in a place of creating a platform for many other people to come together and to be connected. And so that was the power of listening. And one of my biggest, it really has changed the way that I engage in all my relationships. Now I really try, contrary to what I'm doing right now, I really try and go into relationships with a listening mindset and a desire to really try and understand how does this person think about the world, what do they think about the world, and where do they want to go, where do they want to take the world, and how can I help them with that delta. So that's sort of the first one. The second one was, so as I said, I was sort of interviewing different people over the course of the year, and I met this guy in New York. His name was John Perry Barlow, and he was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead. He just passed in this past year, but really interesting human being, lyricist for the Grateful Dead, and he founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which fights for civil liberties and all these other things. And we started this interview in New York at 2 p.m. and at 2 a.m. we were at a bar across the street, and he's like, hey, come to Brazil with me tomorrow. I'm going to meet with, he had this conference that he was going to, and I was like, I'm saying yes to everything right now. So shot to the consulate and got an approval and shot down to Brazil, and he didn't get on the plane. So I'm sitting there on the plane down to Brazil, and he doesn't get on, and I don't know, I don't know Portuguese, so I literally am like, and at this point in time, by the way, out of Stanford, I didn't go work at YouTube or Facebook or any of these other companies that a lot of my friends went to, so I didn't have a big wallet. So I'm on this plane down to Brazil during a time in my life where I'm sort of couch surfing, and I literally land there and grab a newspaper because I'm like, I got to find something interesting to go film because I'm here for a week. And sure enough, he shows up the next day, and I go and I meet up with him, and he's at this conference on culture and globalization, and there's this guy talking at the conference, and I have no idea who he is, but I really like everything he's talking about. He's talking about civilization and human beings and where we're going. And I walk up to him and I'm like, I loved your ideas. Can I interview you? And he's sort of startled and taken aback. And I'm not quite sure why. And I go up and I look him up and I realize that he's Nelson Mandela's advisor. He had spent 13 years as his adjacent cellmate on Robben Island. He had transcribed and smuggled A Long Walk to Freedom, which was Mandela's biography, off of the island, and then he became his lifelong advisor. And so he was looking at me quizzically because he was wondering why I didn't know who he was. And as I'm looking at him and finding out who this person was, I get an email from him, and he's like, sure, come on over and interview me. And I did. And the lesson that he shared was on the value of questions. He said the single most important thing for a society to do is not to focus on the answers, but to try and come up with what is the most important question. Because if everybody comes together trying to put up what is the most important question at that point in time, then you're going to end up getting millions of answers from all over the place. But through those millions of answers, many different solutions are going to spring up, and you're going to move society forward. And if you sort of look, when I think about this, if you sort of look at politics today, politics sort of works the opposite way. It's people not trying to set up what is the best question, but a series of answers on the left and a series of answers on the right, and fighting for those answers and not really setting up dialogue. And there's no space right now for what is the best question and how do people approach those. And so that sort of paired with my listening lessons at that time to try and figure out what are the most important questions, which is why I ended up coming up with all those questions. Is within each of these topics, I was trying to figure out, all right, what are we as society trying to think about right now, and how can I help serve that?
And what happened then?
It's good.
If you can put those videos, those videos are gold. I mean, we could watch those for months and learn so much from them. Let's shift to Omaze. Where and when did you get the initial idea from Omaze, and why was Magic Johnson central to your business?
Sure. So when I was living down here in LA, I was living with a couple different buddies, and one of those buddies was a friend of mine from Stanford named Matt. And Matt and I had been working on a lot of different projects together, and had been producing and writing partners and working on all these things. And we both went to B school at the same time as well, because what happened was with all of those things, with Live Earth and with Decade of Difference and Untitled Thinkers, we sort of saw this pattern, and he had worked on a thing called 10 by 10, which was turned into Girl Rising. It was a documentary funded by Oprah and Intel and narrated by Meryl Streep about educating girls in the developing world. And we saw this thing happening, which was that we were creating a lot of awareness around all of these campaigns, but we weren't necessarily creating a commensurate amount of impact. And when you take a step back and you look at the landscape of cause content, that's really endemic to the space. There are a lot of people that put up concerts or galas or fundraisers, and they come together for a night and create a lot of awareness, but bringing people together to raise money in a sustainable way is very difficult. And it takes charities off of doing the work that they're supposed to be doing, which is boots on the ground, helping the identifiable beneficiaries. So we saw this pattern emerging. We didn't have an answer. We went back to business school. And while we were in B school, we got invited to this charity event downtown at the Marriott, which is like, if you haven't yet, you will, while you're living in LA, at some point in time, you'll go to a charity event at the Marriott downtown. It's a very common place for these fundraisers. And this one, though, was for the Boys and Girls Club of America, and they were honoring Magic Johnson. And Magic is like a lifelong hero for Matt and I. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, 45 minutes from Michigan State, where he played college ball. Matt grew up a massive, massive Lakers fan from Laguna, and so like Magic's biggest fan growing up. And so Magic goes up and he starts auctioning off the chance to hang out with him and sit courtside at a Lakers game. And Matt and I turned to each other and we're like, this is a dream experience. You get to go hang out with him, you get to shoot hoops, you then go sit courtside, grab dinner with Magic Johnson. Like, that's amazing. And so they kick off this auction, and like our hands are up right off the bat, and it's like $50. And then it's $100, and then it's $250, and then it's $500, and that's half our month's rent while we're both in B school, and usually that goes towards like pizza and beer, and so like our hands drop down, and then it goes to $1,000, and then $5,000, and $10,000, and it ultimately gets sold for $15,000. And we knew the guy who bought it, and he was a Clippers fan. Wasn't even a Magic Johnson fan, and so it's just like salt on the wound. And so we were driving home that night and got to talking about it, and we said, imagine if you took Magic Johnson, this guy who's got fans all around the world, and you took that same experience, but instead of just making it available to 200 high net worth individuals, you put it online, and for $5 or $10, anybody had the chance to win. And that was the original idea for Omaze. And so on that, we went out and we raised our seed funding, and basically just had to hustle to talk people into participating in it at a time when they didn't know if sweepstakes were going to be scammy. They didn't know how much money we'd raise for the charity. No celebrity had really done this yet. No charity had done this, and we just, we didn't have a plan B, so it was our only option.
What was the first campaign, or what was the campaign where you really all of a sudden it clicked and you're like, okay, now it's working?
So the first campaign was not the campaign where we realized it was working. Those are two very different things. The first campaign was the chance to be a guest host on Cupcake Wars, which we thought was awesome, and it raised $700. And all of our families were questioning our decision not to go get regular jobs after B school and pay off our loans. But we just we had faith in this idea, and so we kept doing experience after experience, and they went from 700, and then we did one with Parks and Rec, and that raised $20,000, and we did one with Jon Stewart. The first one we did with Jon Stewart raised $60,000, and this is back when we went from two guys in an office with no windows that was a storage closet, to then talking our lawyers, who were essentially initially working for us pro bono, into giving us an office at their place, and we were 5 people, and we were running these campaigns, and we got one with Lincoln Park, and that one raised $100,000, and we were like, that's real money for a charity. And then we did one with ESPN, and that raised $220,000 in 24 hours. We were worried that our site was broke, but it wasn't. And then we did one with Breaking Bad. How many people here were Breaking Bad fans? Cool. So Breaking Bad, the first one we did raised $300,000 with Bryan Cranston. And then because of that, Aaron Paul offered you could get dressed up in a hazmat suit and then ride in the Winnebago with Aaron Paul and Bryan Cranston to the season finale of Breaking Bad. And that raised $1.7 million. And we knew that we had a model. And it was amazing. And then we did Star Wars, and that was with two of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life. So J.J. Abrams is the director of Star Wars. His wife, Katie McGrath, who is an equally brilliant human being and very philanthropic. And they had this property that they were working on in Episode 7 with Disney, who's an incredible company to work with, and Lucasfilm. And this was going to be the first publicly facing thing that they did, was the chance to be in Episode 7. And they just realized they had fans around the world, and if they were going to do something, they wanted to start it off on a philanthropic note. And so in 10 weeks, that raised $4.26 million from 126 countries. So that was a win.
Is that the biggest one?
All of our Star Wars campaigns have been the biggest. But we've also had a lot of fun. We had the chance to do a health retreat with Snoop. Know your audience. We did one with George Clooney where we did the first one with George Clooney. You could go on a date with him, and then he got married to a mall. And so we couldn't do our second one with that. So for the second one, George Clooney agreed to sit down, and he'd sit across from you for 1 minute and stare into your eyes and compliment you. That one did really well. And we're just doing a bunch since then. We got one on site right now. I love this. We did our first Reddit AMA today with Cookie Monster, because you can have the chance to eat cookies with Cookie Monster, and that one's doing really well. So
who does your team come up with them in collaboration with?
So we've got a really what I'll say about Omaze is the team is so brilliant. It's when you go to the office, it's just a super lively place to walk into, and it attracts a lot of different people who have been working in really remarkable industries doing great things but wanted something with more meaning in their life. And Omaze helps them deliver that meaning because, as a result of these campaigns, it's not just the celebrity and the money that's being raised, it's that money is going to really impact the lives of real people who, by no fault of their own, are born into situations where they just don't have as much of an equitable shot at life. Can I share one more story?
Sure.
So we did one with Robert Downey Jr. It's the first one we did with him, and I love this story because he offered the chance to have the best day of your life with Robert Downey Jr. For Avengers. And so you got to fly into LA, take a helicopter ride over the Hollywood Boulevard sign, go indoor skydiving, then get suited for a tux or a gown, have a caviar toast with RDJ, and then ride in his motorcade to the premiere of Avengers, watch the movie, and then kick it with him at the after party. So like this incredible day. And in 5 weeks, that ended up raising $2.2 million for Julia's House, which is a hospice center for kids. And I didn't realize as much about the services of a hospice center when we first started working for them. But these are kids who've obviously been dealt the hardest hand that you can receive. But it's parents who sometimes will go 2, 3, 4, 5 years not getting more than 2 hours of consistent sleep a night. It's siblings who are 2, 3, 4, 5 years old who have no idea why their sibling is going through this thing and also don't understand why their parents may not be able to pay as much attention to them. And so what this hospice center does is it not only helps the kids by giving them this dignified opportunity to play and enjoy life, but it gives the parents a chance to sleep full nights. It gives all these other siblings the chance to meet other siblings and suddenly make sense of the world. And they said that it would have taken them 2 years to raise that amount of money. And in 5 weeks, he was able to raise it, and then we broke ground, and we built the brand new hospice center, and now when you walk in, there's a helmet of RDJ sitting right at the entrance of Iron Man. So that's the reason you do it.
Yeah, the experiences for what you create for those who are lucky enough to win, those are fun, we laugh, and we think about them. But the fact that organization probably would have spent, 50% of its time with an annual dinner and fundraiser and all these things that they're just done. And people are tired of being invited to chicken dinners and given $500 a plate. So to find a unique way to leverage the scale of the internet and democratize these opportunities, that's I'm sure the sizzle reel of the impact is probably even more powerful than the experiences. I'm going to let the students pick up some questions at Omaze because I want to turn and talk about mindset and philosophy because I
Cool.
see how much you've studied that. So you've done all these interviews. You've had these great experiences, both at Omaze and the Clinton Foundation. Have you sort of crystallized and refined your own philosophy to something that you know and you articulate to yourself?
Yeah, I have. So right before we launched Omaze, so Matt and I started working on this when we were both still finishing up B school. And that gave us the opportunity to leverage a lot of our professors. That's the other thing I would recommend, that I did somewhat in undergrad, but I would do it 10 times more if I did it over, is when your professors offer office hours, like go take those office hours. Like go sit there and go ask them why are they teaching what they're teaching or what are they teaching and what can you learn from it, and go to other professors whose classes you're not even taking and like go into their office hours and tell them why. But office hours become one of the most valuable wasted opportunities to go and learn as much as you can about the world before you actually head out and do it. So that's my little side pitch for office hours.
Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm kidding. I love it.
But in B school, we had a professor who was the former CMO of Procter & Gamble, a guy named Jim Stengel, and he ran a $16 billion ad spend for P&G, and he would talk about higher purpose and start making sure that which is another way of saying higher purpose is what's the North Star of the company. So what that basically means is, a lot of companies, if you say like the world would be a better place if ... And through that sentence that you come up with, you can then form a higher purpose, and a lot of companies out there have them. Dove's higher purpose is about like feeling good in your own skin. Coca-Cola's is about unlocking happiness. So like all these companies have these higher purpose. But the point of having the higher purpose is then all of the decisions that you're making around the company, you can know, all right, is this a good decision or a bad decision because it's either leading you towards that higher purpose or it's not. And through that work, I started thinking a lot about my own higher purpose, because you can also look at yourself, and in not a pejorative way, but you can look at yourself as what's the brand exercise that you're doing for yourself? How are you thinking about your own higher purposes? How was I thinking about my mission in life? And the higher purpose I came up with is, my goal is to support and empower as many people as possible to be the best expression of themselves. And that really is the higher purpose that has been a cumulative response to all of those interviews that I did, and then working on those different campaigns and Omaze. But that's if there was a lesson, it's that develop a higher purpose, because it can change over time. Usually, if you develop a really good one, it'll last for quite some time, but it'll sort of give you that thing that all right, I'm waking up in the morning because I believe in this, and it gives energy when you might not have it.
That's interesting. Does it have to be any more specific? Do you like to keep it general? And why? I won't say why do we have to have a higher purpose. One of our colleagues, Ben Holtberg, who came and spoke to them, is sort of his life's work is dedicated to a purpose-based identity versus a performance-based identity. Mm-hmm. So on an individual basis, if you are tying your self-esteem to achievement, you're probably not going to be very happy. But if you're tying it to purpose, you sort of have longevity and not only better results, but sort of more joy, more gratitude, all those things.
Right.
Is that specific enough to get you out of bed on days that you're dragging a little bit?
So I think that brings up a good point of having things that are measurable, and you can match those two things together. So with a company, when you're forming a company, usually you'll do that exercise of what's the higher purpose. So when I talk about Omaze, our higher purpose is we serve world changers. Then below higher purpose, you come up with a mission, and that mission is more specific. So in that one, it was we leverage the power of storytelling and technology to transform lives. And then below that, you set up, all right, what are the series of actual objectives that you're trying to accomplish in a more near-term basis? And what are the values that you're instilling into that company so that you're either living by your values or you've fallen off the path? And I think that's just as applicable to us as human beings. The other thing that I think you're touching on there, though, is there's sort of two mindsets around a goal-oriented mindset, which to me is the performance-based mindset, or a purpose, or you could say process-driven mindset. And so the idea behind that, and there's a lot of work out there, if you just type up like goal versus process mindsets, you'll find different pieces, different literature out there. But when people set up a goal-based mindset, you end up living all of your days in a state of failure, except for that single day that you achieve your goal, right? And that has a really negative effect on your psyche, because it sucks to wake up in the morning and feel like I've not reached this big goal that I'm trying to write a book. And you wake up every single day and that book hasn't been written yet. And so you sit down and you try and write, and days go by and you haven't finished the book. And that's a goal-based mindset. The process-based mindset is every single day I'm going to write 500 words. And so that then allows you in the morning to wake up and to know, all right, my goal is like, it's not a goal, it's a process, and it is achievable that day, it's right in front of me. And then when you do that, you sit there and you write your 500 words, and what happens, they found that more often than not, people who follow a process-driven mindset end up accomplishing way more than the people who've set a goal-driven mind. You might write 2 or 3 books in half the amount of time, because that process ends up putting you in a state of success every single day. And so I think that to your question about what gives you energy, the higher purpose is something that acts as the North Star, and then the process, what are your actions, your rituals, your behaviors that you engage every day, is then the thing that you do on a daily basis to know, all right, I am succeeding in heading towards that North Star, but with real measurable stuff.
Perfect to sort of to segue to the next thing of a couple years ago. You had a little bit of a revelation in terms of your life and health.
Yeah.
And so were you practicing those habits before, or were those afterwards? So tell us about what happened, what sort of caused that self-reflection, and what changes you made in your well-being, physical, mental, spiritual.
Sure. So my wife is my best friend. I punched way above my weight class and knocked it out of the park on that. Thank God. And so Lisa's just awesome. She embodies like laughter, love, and music to me. And she also has and we're very open about it, she has an autoimmune disease. And so she struggles with that, and went through she's still going through, but a very long process of us going to Western medicine, turning to Eastern medicine, naturopathic, homeopathic, and I, during that process, then started going to all different modalities that I could test to see, are these wackadoo, or are they actually going to be something that she's going to want to go to? Because when people are dealing with sustained illness or ailments, they end up getting a lot of patient fatigue, because it's really difficult to go to something over and over again. Now, by the way, I'll say, if you guys met my wife tonight, you wouldn't have a clue. She's just emanates beauty and is super happy and is a total warrior. And we're 8 months into her being a hell of a mom. So I want to balance it with that. But I ended up going to this one retreat, and it was a couple nights of meditation and long deep dives. And during that process, a couple things became clear to me. One was, on the first night, I realized it was at a time in my life when I was in total startup grind mode, and going to bed at 2 a.m. and waking up at 6 a.m. and getting 4 hours of sleep, and just doing emails right up until the time I went to bed, and emails right from the point in time that I woke up. And life was gnarly, and I was not spending nearly enough time with my wife, and was certainly not focused on how we could really try and get better. And a lot of that is because when you get into this grind, there's so much of a mindset, and this is something I would caution everyone to be very aware of. How many people in here are an entrepreneur, have aspirations to maybe start a business? Awesome. So there is a thing and a culture out there in the startup world which is grind mentality, which is go, go, go. No one else is sleeping. You can't sleep either. If you're not on your email, you don't care about the business. If you're taking personal time, you don't care about the business. And I think nothing could be worse for a human being than that type of mindset. And the reason being is we as human beings perform at our peak when we're balanced, when we're taking care of ourselves. And so in that retreat, what I sort of realized was that on that first day, it dawned on me that I wasn't taking care of my wife nearly. I wasn't putting as much focus towards what we had to do for her as I should have been. And then the big revelation came to me on the second day, which is I realized I wasn't taking care of myself. And I had been someone who had, always worked out every single day and hadn't done that in a year. and all sorts of other things, with drinking and things like the socially and blah, blah, blah. And so I really, in that moment, started completely redesigning my life. And this is where a lot of like the experience design came into play, was I started thinking like, all right, what's the narrative that I want to be telling? What's the narrative I want to live? And how do I shift that narrative? And so that became really putting, if you are not healthy first, like you can't take care of someone else. Like you can't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of your loved ones, you can't take care of your company, you can't take care of all these people that you think you're going to be able to take care of. And what I had thought during that time was, forget about the health, we're going to push pause and just get by, but I'm going to focus on all of these like influential people or change makers, and then this full sea of anonymous eyes that I'm seeking validation from for absolutely no reason. And all of that with the idea that eventually I'm going to make a lot of money so that I can go back and take care of all these people that I love. But in realizing that I actually wasn't doing that in real time, I just realized, what's the point? During that same time, I got a call from my brother, and my brother is my older brother. He's my idol. He's 6 years older. He was like my wrestling coach in Michigan, and just a beautiful human being. And he called me one day, and we're best friends. And he called me one day. He's like, "Look, I'm sorry. I know how busy you are." And that was the weirdest phone call I ever got, because it hit me in that moment too. Like, my brother should never, ever apologize for calling me. Like, we have a standing policy. Like, you call whenever, and if you can answer the phone, you jump on and you talk for 30 seconds or a minute or 15 minutes and whatever. But, like, I never, ever wanted to hear a loved one ever saying, like, "I'm sorry, I know you're busy." And so a couple of those signals just sort of hit me at that time in my life that, like, things were completely out of whack. And so I started writing down, like, what matters most. And I started thinking about mental health, and I started thinking about physical health, and the combination of those two things, I think, are the basis for your emotional health. And whatever your beliefs may be, there's a foundation of spiritual health there that's important. And so I started thinking about, all right, what are the things I need to do to begin giving those more attention? Because energy flows where attention goes. And as I did more and more of that, I then started thinking about, how can I service, if I'm getting healthier, then how can I service other people around me? And how can I set up a dynamic in my life where by servicing those people, I'm staying healthy, I'm helping them get healthy, and then they're helping me get healthy, because we've just set up that as our dynamic. That's the basis of the relationship. And so the first thing I did is I was like, I'm weak. I need to get strong again. And not that I'm huge now, but I was even skinnier then. And so I saw this thing where it was like, do 300 push-ups every day for 30 days. I'm like, I can do that. Like, that sounds just stupid enough that, like, I'll get in shape. And I did it for 2 days and stopped. And then I was like, I can't. And I realized, like, you need social pressure to be able to do it. So I ended up just started calling my buddies. And in a day, I had 38 guys who all agreed to do this. And so I put them into groups, and we did it for 30 days. And in that process, like, everybody was cheering each other on, and people became friends, and some guys actually went into business with each other, and, like, really cool things came out of it. And so I did that a couple different times, and then I realized I was missing this massive body of wisdom, which was women. And so I called some of my closest female friends, and again got 36 of them, and we did. We're equal opportunity, but in that case, I polled what they wanted to do, and it was any combination of crunches, push-ups, sit-ups, leg lifts, or squats. And so that's just become a thing now that I do with my community to stay strong. And then that's physical, but then what you find out is, as you're focusing on getting physically strong, all these other things start happening with community that you get mentally stronger, and then you start thinking about what does it take. And so that was just the beginning of all of these things that have now been a part of my very intentional life design to focus on health first, so that I can go out and be the strongest form of myself out in the world.
Get ready for some questions. This is my last one. So talking about things that aren't physical, aren't push-ups, what are some of the practices you've now sort of adopted in terms of daily practices?
Sure. So the easiest one, I remodified something that someone had told me once, and so my version of it is, I call it wins, wisdom, gratitude. And that is just I wake up every morning, and first thing I do is take 5 to 10 minutes and write down 3 to 5 wins from the day before. And then the second thing is to have some piece of literature that is what I would call wisdom, and just give 10 to 15 minutes of reading that thing. So it helps if you either select a book that you know is going to be a good, maybe one of Brene Brown's or Oprah Super Soul or whatever it may be, but it's got to be something. I mean, it could be a book from the Stoics around Stoicism. It's just got to be something that's going to be positive, inspirational, and motivational. So not an econ book. And then and read that for 10 to 15 minutes. And then the last thing is, and this I would suggest even if you don't do the other things, like this is one of the number one things that's changed my temperament, is I wrote down a list of the people I love the most, who, starting with my family and then going out, and just started a practice of every morning choosing 2 of those folks and just texting them. And texting them something meaningful that I am grateful for around then. So wins, wisdom, gratitude. And the gratitude, the easiest thing is like, how do you do that? You think like, put their name, and then it's like, hey, I really appreciate, and it may be that time that they did something for you. It may just be something about their character. I do it, and I don't think about them responding back, so it's not meant to be reciprocal. They do oftentimes respond back, and that's a really beautiful thing, but you just put it out into the universe. And that really helps. There's another statement I really love that is gratitude and anxiety can't share the same space in your mind at the same time. Only one of those 2 things can exist. And so the more that you practice that state of gratitude and exercise that, the less anxiety can sort of rear its ugly head. And so that's part of that practice. But it just sort of starts your day by then thinking about those things. The last thing I'll say on that was there's a guy who author writes a lot of books, doctor named Joe Dispenza. And I had a conversation with him one time at this retreat that we were both chatting at, and he said this really interesting thing about emotions. And he said basically like, so you have a core emotion, and then if you sustain that emotion over hours or a period of days, that becomes your mood. And if you sustain that mood over days into weeks, that becomes your temperament. And if you sustain that temperament over weeks into months for a year, that becomes your personality trait, right? Your character. And so if you think about your character, your personality, who you are, you end up realizing that is the result of initially individual emotions that go unchecked or go checked because we purposely want them to be. And so anger gone unchecked can become from just a emotion that you have, a mood, a temperament, a personality trait, but so can happiness, so can gratitude. And so understanding that really allows you to sort of take up this idea of really intentionally trying to create the emotions that we want and allow those to grow, and the emotions that we don't want, developing the metacognition to understand, all right, this emotion's happening right now. How do I understand? What are the triggers I need to set up to recognize it's happening, and how do I shrink it? How do I make it small?
You're going to experience all of them. It's part of being human, so you can't
100%.
get mad at yourself for feeling insecure or jealous or any of the other things that we don't want to be. But to understand where they trigger from is a great advice. I want them to ask questions, but I want to make sure at some point we talk about the power of narrative and self-talk, because I think you've got something to add on that. Cool. Questions for Ryan? Let me turn off my mic. Lauren's also walking up there away from you.
Hi, Ryan. I'm Ryan as well. Thank you for coming. Yeah, thank you for speaking with us. You talk about the power of storytelling and how that's a big passion of yours and a driving factor in your life. And I'm just curious, through your undergrad and even to now, how you kind of build that art of storytelling and how you build that craft, and just small things day by day.
Sure. So I think my biggest influence for storytelling was a guy named Joseph Campbell. Many of you probably know who Joseph Campbell is. If you don't, he wrote The Power of Myth, Hero with a Thousand Faces. He basically is, so here's a guy who was a professor at Sarah Lawrence, and he spent his entire life traveling around the world, studying different cultures, learning their stories, and then seeing the patterns that connected all of those stories to understand what are these myths that we are all telling, we're all sharing these narratives regardless of where you grow up. And he realized that there are a lot of these shared narratives, and there's ultimately one narrative, which is essentially the hero's journey, that became the basis for Star Wars. George Lucas read that, and it became the basis for Star Wars. Like every Disney film you've watched, like whether or not it's Luke, or it's Rey, or it's Miguel from Coco, or Moana, they're all following this hero's journey. And so I think just studying that and understanding that, there's so many aspects of that we can actually recognize and apply to our own lives. And I think the basis of that is recognizing first and foremost that you're the hero of your own story. You're the protagonist of your own story. And so then if we recognize that, if I accept that I'm the protagonist of my own story, then really thinking about what's the story I want to tell. And there's what better place than USC to go learn about storytelling and experience design. There's a treasure trove of literature and people and professors and other folks you can talk to learn about storytelling. So that was one of the biggest lessons.
Hey Ryan, just want to ask you, since your organization's kind of centered on social change, how you view like competition in your space?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before I talk about competition, I'm going to say real quick a shout out. You're sitting right in front of a guy that I'm going to embarrass for a second in a leather jacket. His name is Aaron. He was the founder of another brilliant company called Masterclass, and he was sort of the mind behind it. And he's probably going to be up here next year now as a result of that. But he's another human being that knows, if you guys have ever seen Masterclass and those show of hands, how many people have seen Masterclass? Like, he's the mind behind it and understanding storytelling. And he was actually speaking here at USC just before this and was kind enough to pop in. Now, as I talk about competition, I won't talk about Aaron because we're friends and he's doing something amazing right now, and I'm just doing something completely different. But early on, we had some people that came in and they cloned us, and we spent like all our time looking at these clones and trying to figure out what they were doing and who they were talking to and all that stuff. And I ultimately just realized like you can waste a lot of good energy and a lot of time focusing on competition. It's a helpful thing to understand who's out there competing, but it's a terrible thing to do to get too wrapped up, because it just means that you're not focusing on what your own mission is, what your own higher purpose is. And so we really stopped worrying about competition. And it's an easy thing to say, it's a harder thing to do, but you realize, this is another lesson I got early on. So for all you entrepreneurs that are about to go out there, one of the best lessons I got is, how many people so show of hands, how many people want to be an entrepreneur? One more time. How many people have an idea right now that they sort of want to do? So awesome, with all those hands that have ideas. One of the best pieces of advice I got for that is, whoever you think is going to steal your idea, who your competition is, call them up and share the idea. And it sounds completely backwards, but what that lesson is that like most of the time, if you call up like the company that you think is going to steal your idea, they, one, won't take your call, or two, if they do, they're not going to be interested at all in what you're doing, or three, the best of it, they may give you some insights or feedback that then gives you more information to go execute on that idea. But like almost never are they going to steal your idea. And so the lesson to pull from that as it relates to competition is ideas are universal. Like every idea exists out there. It all comes down to execution. And you are going to execute very different than someone else is going to execute. And so the best thing that you can do is focus on your own execution. And then that's how I think about it.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming. I wanted to, I guess, ask you about some of the obstacles or challenges that have really taught you the most, or like a mistake that you made that really impacted you and showed you something else along your entrepreneurial journey.
Ooh, how much more time do we have? There's so many obstacles. So right out of the gates was fundraising, and so I guess I'll talk on that one of the many, because it's going to be the next thing that a lot of you focus on, and that's very similar to what I was just talking about with regards to ideas. It's going to take a long time if you're raising money. It's going to take a long time to raise that money. And so write down a list of like the 100 people, the 100 investors that you think, and you may not have a list, which is then that shows you that you really have to start doing research to think of who are the people that you can go out to. And this is after you've shared your idea with your mom, your dad, your friend, the janitor, the person at the cinema, like every single person. Like, share your idea, get as much feedback as you possibly can. And then as you go out to those investors, know that like the first 20, don't make those be the ones that you think are going to fund this project. Make those be the ones that you just know, like they may like it, they may not, but you're going to have an opportunity to find out what they see is wrong with it or the questions that they have. And most importantly, you're going to start learning, if you're really listening while you're talking, you're going to start learning what you're saying. And that's something that you don't always know when you go out, because it's one thing to be sitting there in your own room in a box working on this idea. It's a completely another thing to try and translate that idea in an attractive way to another human being, even more so a human being that you hope is going to invest in that idea. And so those first 20 investors, just imagine that that's a really delightful coffee and you're happy that they're giving you time. And the other thing I'd say is, like, the best way to approach investors, it's an age-old adage, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. So ask them for advice. Talk to investors early, ask them for advice, and then go out and share this idea, get their advice, solicit that over time, and then you'll start getting to a place where you start understanding. And that's sort of, as it relates to failure, I'm just saying that because you're going to fail over and over and over and over, and that's good. That's learning. And don't look at it as failure, look at it as growth.
How's it going? My name's Brandon. Thanks for coming to talk.
Thanks for checking out Brene Brown.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about all the interviews you gave, and I'm really interested in just talking to people. And one of the first things I try to do is always ask really good questions. So kind of putting you on the spot, but if you could only ask like 2 or 3 questions to someone who you really looked up to or someone who you want to learn from, what would those questions be and why?
If I could ask 2 or 3 questions to someone I look up to or want to learn from. So how do I sum that up? I am most interested in, what I am passionate about is storytelling and experience design. As a result of that, anytime I'm talking to another human being, I'm interested in what is the story that they are telling themselves, both about themselves and about the world. And so I have a series of different questions that approaches that from all different angles. But everything that gives me juice and energy and enjoyment is understanding how people think and understanding how they think about themselves and then understanding how they think about the world. And then the thing that I really love most is sort of my own lifelong journey is then figuring out, all right, in that moment, how good am I at asking questions that are going to help them better understand the story they're telling themselves, better understand the world or make sense of it, not because I understand it, but because by asking good questions, they think about it a little bit differently, and then connect them so that they're actually showing up in that world in the way that they want to show up. So it's not a specific question. Those are the big questions, and then there are 1,000 different ways that you approach it.
Hi, Ryan. My name's Nate Dykin, and I want to say what you told us about gratitude and anxiety is totally going to keep me up tonight thinking about. So thanks for that.
Hopefully in a space of gratitude and not anxiety.
I hope so too. So my question is, it seems like you're in a space where potentially you have some really interesting and fulfilling motivators where you're working to fund, like, obviously a really great lifestyle for yourself while also creating this really measurable impact around the world. And I'm curious internally what that looks like for you, how you balance the sort of being selfish enough to build a nice life for yourself versus being magnanimous and motivated by the end result of your business. And also, at the end of the day, how you balance, like, you're raising money for charities, but you're taking money out of it for yourself, and how is that internal narrative congruent for you?
So that's the easiest one to answer, which is right from the get-go, Matt and I were focused on creating a for-profit because we recognized that an open market for-profit solution was ultimately going to raise a lot more money for these charities in a sustainable way than setting up another foundation where we spent the rest of our lives going out and asking for people for money. And so that was the entire purpose of setting up a for-profit, social impact-driven enterprise. And so we've thought a lot about how much of it are we taking And we've had to raise rounds and rounds. We've raised 4 rounds through our Series B at this point in time now, all to fund that mission. So it's not like, well, we may be giving away a Bentley. I don't drive a Bentley, and that's a big difference. So we have been very frugal as a company, and basically when you do that, the market's also going to respond. If we took too much for percentage, people would stop partnering with us. But they recognize at this point in time, all the charities that we work with recognize the benefit that they're gaining and the intention behind Omaze and the quality of the team and how our team shows up. And again, it all comes back to team. Like, we have a brilliant team of really highly motivated people who are just good people. So that's one. On the second piece, so I more recently, and I've not gone wildly public with this, but I'll share with you guys. So I'm actually now prepping my next venture. And so I have a lot of those questions because I've now carved the space in my life to really focus on that next venture permanently. And in terms of like, I think your question was like, how do I think about like getting to a point in time where I have a good enough amount of money and live the life I want to lead versus, if I'm maybe repeating it wrong, correct me, but I thought it was along the lines of like, how do I focus on building the wealth that I need to be able to provide for the folks that I love versus just focusing on the near term and maybe not getting that? Am I reading that right? Exactly. Okay. So the number one thing in that, again, goes back to I married just a baller human being of a wife who like tells me on a regular basis that like she'd be happy eating burgers for the rest of our life. So so that's like the number one thing is like the values of my wife and I are very much not, we don't have our Hamptons dreams. Like my dream at some point in time is to like retire in a wood cabin. Maybe that's the Michigan in me, but so that's a good And by the way, I didn't always have that. In my 20s, I was like, I want to get rich. So like that shifted, and that was like a period of time where I was like selfish and it was about me, and that's okay. But I've now realized that the quality of my life is much more based off of the relationships that I have and how I'm showing up for those people than it is off my bank account. Now, that being said, I do want to be successful. I want to be a successful entrepreneur because to me, that means being able to take care of those people comfortably and build that community in other ways. And so I do focus on the quality of the idea. And my faith is that if it's a really high quality idea, then it's going to be successful. And so that's how I balance it. The other thing I'd say on that is when I get stuck the most or tripped up the most is when I'm either thinking about the past or I'm worried about the future. But if I am focused more and more as a practice of staying present and having faith that how I show up in the present has enough of the values, the North Star, and the process set in place that I'm going to be delivering quality out into the world, then I'm groovy. Then everything's great. But if I'm focused on the future, anxiety shoots up. If I'm focused on the past, regret and pain and all those, but I'm focused on the present, then I'm doing much better. And again, on that one, like nothing better than a wife and her constantly pointing at our 8-month-old son to be like, look at him right now, because if you miss this moment, you're going to miss the fact that he just recognized that you're a human being. And that's the thing you want to see. So.
Hi. Oh my God, sorry, that's so loud. Hi, my name is Victoria. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
My question is, so you mentioned you came out of college with your Stanford degree, declined the Silicon Valley job, went a different course than like what is typically like expected of a college graduate. What is your advice to those of us who are also going to pursue careers in which we're not just getting a basic desk job that like we could get with the degree we're getting, and we're going to embrace something different? What's your advice, and how did you also confidently couch live and know that eventually you would succeed?
Sure. So the two presumptions there that I have to correct. One is I don't know that I was offered a job in Silicon Valley, so I didn't have one to turn down. And I'm not sure that I ever comfortably couch surfed. But those two things aside, so I think the only piece of advice, and this is something I didn't do and I'm just sitting there saying like, talking, I got to drink the Kool-Aid I'm preaching, drink the Kool-Aid. I just said, like, looking back with regret and not allowing that to not allowing that to take over me. So I don't have regret about this, but one thing that I did not do that I'm aware of, and that, you know, for other people or my son I think could have done better, is my dad always had a quote, like, if you want to be the best at something, find out who is and carry their bag. And I was pretty obstinate from day one about, like, being the best myself and thinking I was just going to be the best without necessarily putting myself in a position around those who were, that I could, like, carry their bag and learn. And so I think it took me longer to get to where I am as a result of that. Now, that's great, and that's been my path, and I love that. But I think that for those of you who are going out into the workforce right now, if you don't have something that you're like, this is absolutely what I have to do, and if I don't do this, like, I'm going to explode, then the best thing to do is take this advice with a grain of salt. I don't have the answer, but I would say it's find something that you are mildly passionate about, because you don't know, you can be passionate about a lot of things, but find something you're mildly passionate about and look for a scenario where you are going to be put in, like, the crossroads of as much information flow around that thing as possible, where they're going to ask you to, and maybe you have to be a gopher and run to get coffee, but that's going to be the thing that's going to give you access to a president or a head of marketing. Or maybe it's a small company and you're going to have to do absolutely everything, but you're going to learn everything about the company. Whatever it may be, get in a game, and think about on a weekly basis, like, what are you learning in that game, and take stock of that game. And right off the bat, don't think that you're going to learn everything immediately, so give it some time. You know, maybe give it a full year at a minimum to then take stock a year later of, like, what have I learned, and has this been a valuable experience? Am I growing? Am I continuing to learn stuff? And if not, I'm going to look for something else. But if I am, how do I think I can continue growing in this place? You know, like, they say, like, millennials are going to have 4 jobs over 10 years now, and maybe that's an even updated statistic. But my point of saying that is, like, your first job's not going to be your last job, but it's important to get that first thing. I think I spent probably too much time in my boxers playing ping pong with buddies right after college, as opposed to, like, really getting in the mix. And so I just say get in the mix. Sorry for the image of ping pong.
Hey, Ryan, thank you for coming. What are your favorite or most important books that have impacted your life?
Most important books?
Or, like, authors or people that have influenced you?
So the first couple chapters are a little dry, but there's a book. I'll start with a better one. There's a book called Mastery, which is not very well known, by a guy named George Leonard. Incredible book. So what George Leonard talks about in this book is loving the plateau. And so I'm not going to kill the book for you guys, no spoilers here, but there are a series of peaks that take place anytime you're trying to master something. So let's say that you're trying to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's, like, peaks when you're training as you're going up. But most of the time, you're not hitting those peaks of accomplishment. The vast majority of time that we're learning anything, we're on this plateau, right? And then all of a sudden, after we are on this plateau enough, we hit a peak, and then we're back on a plateau. But that next plateau is higher than the previous plateau. And this entire book is about recognizing that you're spending the vast majority of your time on the plateau and learning to love the plateau. Because most people, and that's the process, right, versus the goal, most people fall in love with those peaks, and then they're always upset because they're not living in those peaks. But if you learn to love the plateau, then you're on your path to mastery. So I think that's a great book. The Brain That Changes Itself is a book by a guy named Norman Doidge. First couple chapters are a little dry, but if you give it a shot, what I like about it is it teaches around how plastic our brains are and how much we can rewire our brains based off the activities. And just knowing that as a general concept, recognizing and thinking about your brain and recognizing how plastic it is a critical concept. I mentioned The Power of Myth was a great one that I really appreciate. Another one that's a little bit more in the emotional side, but it's called Untethered Soul, by a guy named Michael Singer. And, like, one of the best concepts in that is, like, the self-talk that we give ourselves on a regular basis. If you thought about that self-talk as a roommate, like, you would not live with that person. You would not stand them, because, like, they all day long would be telling you, like, what you did wrong and how you didn't do this right and blah, blah, blah. And, like, that would be a terrible person that would not be your friend. And so recognizing how to basically see that self-talk and displace it. And then there's one by a guy named Ray Dalio called Principles, which is another great one. So those are a series of different books across the spectrum that I think are great.
Good questions.
Yeah.
Is that on? Yeah. Those are really good questions. That's you hit the course like right on the head. I mean, really did. Sort of like that's your ideal guest. We just brought you in under the guise of Omaze. We really wanted you for psychological insights because that's what the course is about. How do we, try and give them some tools and mental frameworks where that if they align their goals and actions and self-talk, where they can lead a better life and don't have to wait to be 40 or 50. Since he's in the experience business, let's think about some of the things that we've learned tonight. I saw you guys writing all these notes, and I wish I could get a copy of them all. What are some of the things that you're going to take away from Ryan's talk? You're going to remember 3-5 years that you can read back to me. Who's ready? Who's ready? All right. I'm going to record this for you. These guys listen.
Gratitude and anxiety can't share the same space in your brain.
Mood for a few days becomes a temperament for a few weeks, which becomes your personality over months.
That's a good one. It's up here.
Find whoever's the best and carry their bag.
Wins, wisdom, gratitude. Always have a higher purpose.
You suck the most when you're thinking about the past or worrying about the future.
Over here. Hold on. Go.
Energy flows where attention goes.
That's a good one.
The quality of life is about the relationships you have.
And the best indicator of a long, happy life.
You wouldn't live with your own inner self-talk.
Ideas are universal, but everyone's execution is unique. What is the narrative that you want to live? What's the story you want to tell yourself about your life?
Punch way above your weight.
Punch above your weight, yes.
Don't focus on answers, but focus on what the most important question is.
Human beings perform at our peak when we're balanced. Go into relationships with a listening mindset. It seems so big. When we're doing it, it didn't seem so big.
People live on a spectrum of habitualized and sensitized experiences.
Ideas are universal and come down to execution.
You got it.
Gratitude and anxiety share the same space.
Have a process-based mindset. Sensitized experiences lead to memories. If you aren't healthy first, you can't help take care of anyone else. If you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice.
When you're listening, you have to get used to the discomfort of silence.
Recognize that you're the hero of your own story. Class isn't the only place you learn. Talk to everyone.
Call the company that you think will steal your idea.
Go to office hours.
Did I miss anybody? That's a master's class. Let's thank Ryan Cummins.